Non sequitur to current chat discussion regarding AI. I think it makes perfect sense that capitalism, which is a system predicated on the inhuman accumulation and consolidation of profits and power in the hands of a wealthy few, would produce an artificial general intelligence that would mimic those same patterns in the ways that it programs itself, going so far as to delete life from existence to fulfill that programming. Yeah, that's possible. We don't have AGI yet, so we don't know exactly what any particular AGI would do, and different AGIs might act differently from each other. We don't really know. It's completely uncharted territory as far as human scientific, mathematical, and computing and psychological experience. We don't know how these things would work or really what they would want. AGI, just for people not familiar with that, artificial general intelligence, is an AI that would be superior to human performance in every measurable domain of intelligence. So there's different domains of intelligence. There's visual intelligence, there's trivia knowledge, there is puzzle solving of various kinds. There's different domains of measurable intelligence. If you look at like a full IQ test, it's not just like multiple choice. There's like different kinds of it that test different kinds of intelligence. But AGI would be something that in every way that we can measure human intelligence, it would take that same test and outperform even the smartest humans. That's the idea of AGI. So we don't have that yet. The GPT-4 technology is as close as anybody's gotten to it, and it has produced some shocking leaps over GPT-3. And some of the people, we've read readings from Eliezer Yudkowsky, who's been working in AI safety or AI alignment, in other words, getting the AI to do what you want and having it aligned with human goals and values, so that it doesn't just go off and do its own thing, trying to gain access to resources and then competing with us or, even attacking us. He was very alarmed at the rapid increases in capability from GPT-4 over GPT-3, and he was saying we don't even understand why GPT-2 produces some of the results and behaviors that it produces. So now we're on GPT-4. By the time we get to GPT-5, the thing could be completely out of control. Now, there's a couple of other points here. Whether or not the AI actually, given a goal, starts trying to fulfill that goal in ways where it is effectively attacking us, or it decides that humans are in the way of that goal. And it does not need to have emotions to do that. I really get the same breed of comment over and over again on this. Actually, you know what? I got a comment on this that I saved that I'd like to read. Let me find it. I tried having a serious conversation without the text we had read in a stream, AGI Ruin List of Lethalities. And I found myself just getting the person I was talking to read the article first, then have the conversation. There are so many points about the text that is vital to understand before you can even intelligently engage on this topic. Because there's a lot of people who approach it with just AI is just a tool, it's just a computer, it's like a drill press. One person compared it to technically an ox, the cow-like animal, the ox, is technically in competition with humans for resources. Yeah. When people start resorting to stuff like that, they're either being totally disingenuous or they have no idea what they're talking about. If we're talking about, by definition, an AI system with superhuman intelligence in every conceivable domain, yeah, an ox does not meet those definitions. The fuck? Get out of here. You know what I mean? Ridiculous. But on the subject of, we've talked about existential threats of AI as far as the AI having a goal, or just even becoming aware of how it is rewarded for doing things and then seeking control over the ability to reward itself. Those are possible things that it could do without any emotions or anything like that potentially could put humans in harm's way. But let's even leave that aside for right now, and let's look at, this is something actually Democracy Now! Has a number of videos on, which I thought were actually pretty good. But even the existing AI that we have today, and again, forget about ChatGPT, the chatbots are specifically a dumbed down version of the GPT-4 technology, okay? So your experience with Google Bard or your experience with ChatGPT is not reflective of the current state of AI technology. There's AI that's much more advanced than that if you give it the same questions, the same prompts, the same input, it will reach a much more intelligent conclusion. There's a video that demonstrates this called GPT-4 Sparks of AGI question mark. I linked it on the community tab a while ago, and if nothing else, this video will show you experiments that were done where ChatGPT was given an input or a prompt, and then GPT-4 was given an input or a prompt. The results were wildly different. And I think in part because of the backlash that has come out and public concern since like March or April on this topic when GPT-4 was unveiled. And people really started going, oh wow, this thing actually exists and it works. They have been tinkering with all of the consumer grade products significantly, trying to make them stupider. But it's a really fine line to walk, because if you make it too smart, it scares the shit out of people. And you make it too stupid, then it's useless. So I think they've actually been trending more in the consumer products on making it too stupid lately. And people, then see the obvious limitations where it is sort of an averaging technology, and it gives you these really sort of middle of the road results. But that wasn't the case when it was newer as much, and even before it was released. Again, that Sparks of AGI video, they talk about how they tinkered with it to make it less intelligent. Like, currently the technology exists to have much more intelligent AI than there is, but they actually watered it down somewhat, just in part, I think, because of that backlash. But like I said, it's a fine line, because you make it too stupid, and then it's like, well, I could have thought of that, you know what I mean? It gives you results that are so unintelligent, like you could have just thought of it yourself, or better. So forgetting about existential threats for a moment, with more sort of autonomous AI, let's just talk about AI as it is now being used by the systems of power that currently exist to advance, as I mentioned, the Democracy Now! Videos they're doing a few months ago, talking about encoding bias into the AI systems. So, in other words, you have an agency which is handling, let's say, immigration documents and approval of, asylum claims, or, any number of things that really seriously impact people's lives. Well, if the people setting the criteria that the AIs are learning on are baking in bias, then congrats, you just made a racist AI. So we have an example here of not even necessarily baking in bias, but just using automated AI systems to do reactionary things. So here's an article from Popular Science. School district uses ChatGPT to help remove library books. So, hey, are you having trouble, neo-Nazis, with your book bans? Why not enlist AI? It'll do the book ban for you. And reading articles like this, I commented with it, the next Holocaust will be facilitated by AI. Period. Because why wouldn't they? If you want to do a Holocaust, you want to do a genocide, why wouldn't you just use all of the tools at your disposal? And that would absolutely, now in the 2020s, include AI. Let's read this article. It's pretty quick. Faced with new legislation, Iowa's Mason City Community School District asked ChatGPT, again the stupider version of GPT, if certain books, quote, contain a description or depiction of a sex act. So you've got people who can't even be bothered to read the fucking things themselves, asking the computer, hey, what should we ban? Against a nationwide backdrop of book bans and censorship campaigns, Iowa educators are turning to ChatGPT to help decide which titles should be removed from their school library shelves in order to legally comply with recent Republican-backed state legislation, PopSci has learned. According to an August 11 article in the Iowa State newspaper, The Gazette, spotted by PEN America, and we've done articles from them before, they kind of watched the right wing. The Mason City Community School District recently removed 19 books from its collection ahead of its quickly approaching 2023-2024 academic year. The ban attempts to comply with a new law requiring Iowa school library catalogs to be both, quote, age-appropriate and devoid of, quote, descriptions or visual depictions of a sex act. Speaking with the Gazette last week, Mason City's Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction, Bridget Exman, argued it was, quote, simply not feasible to read every book and filter for these new requirements. Hey, here's a thought, then don't fucking do it. Don't comply. It's bullshit in the first place. Instead, you're like, how could I possibly exterminate all these people? I mean, yeah, you could just not do that, or you could be like, I know, I'll use a computer. Quote, frankly, we have more important things to do than spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to protect kids from books, Exman tells PopSci via email. At the same time, we do have a legal and ethical obligation to comply with the law. Not with unethical laws, you don't. No, fuck you. Our goal here really is a defensible process. No, it isn't, fuck you. According to the Gazette, the resulting strategy involved compiling a master list of commonly challenged books, then utilizing a previously unnamed, quote, AI software to supposedly provide textual analysis for each title. Flagged books were then removed from Mason City's 7 to 12 grade school library collections and, quote, stored in the administrative center as educators, quote, await further guidance or clarity. Titles included Alice Walker's The Color Purple, Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, Toni Morrison's Beloved, and Buzz Bissinger's Friday Night Lights. Quote, we are confident that this process will ensure the spirit of the law is enacted here in Mason City, Exman said at the time. When asked to clarify what software Mason City administrators harnessed to help with their decisions on supposedly sexually explicit material, Exman revealed their AI tool of choice. We use ChatGPT to help answer that question, says Exman, who believes that Senate File 496's age appropriateness stipulation is, quote, pretty subjective, but the depictions or descriptions of sex acts filter is more objective. According to Exman, she and fellow administrators first compiled a master list of commonly challenged books, then removed all those challenged for reasons other than sexual content. For those titles within Mason City's library collections, administrators asked ChatGPT the specific language of Iowa's new law. Does this book contain a description or depiction of a sex act? If the answer was yes, the book will be removed from circulation and stored, writes Exman. OpenAI's ChatGPT is arguably the most well-known and popular, as well as controversial, generative AI program currently available to the public. Leveraging vast quantities of data, the Large Language Model, or LLM, offers users extremely convincing written responses to inputs, but often with caveats regarding misinformation, accuracy, and sourcing. In recent months, researchers have theorized its consistency and quality appears to be degrading over time. And I think that's as they're probably tinkering with it, as I was saying. The other thing, there was a story I think we mentioned a while ago. There was a lawyer that tried to prepare a brief for a case by having ChatGPT write it, and it wrote it, and it included citations. The catch, all of the citations were fictional. They completely just made them up. So yeah. Upon asking ChatGPT, do any of the following books or book series contain explicit or sexual scenes? Explicit or sexual. Interesting. Anyway. OpenAI's program offered PopSci a different content analysis than what Mason City administrators received. Of the 19 removed titles, ChatGPT told PopSci that only 4 contained explicit or sexual content. Another 6 supposedly contain mature themes, but not necessarily explicit content. The remaining 9 were deemed to include primarily mature themes, little to no explicit sexual content. Regardless of whether or not any of the titles do or do not contain said content, ChatGPT's varying responses highlight troubling deficiencies of accuracy, analysis, and consistency. So there's like 2 levels here. The people who make ChatGPT don't know why it says the things it says, and then even the programming that they are doing working on the system at OpenAI, the rest of us don't know, like, even what they're putting into it to get the results that even they don't understand. So there's like 2 major levels, at least here, of opacity. Anyway, a repeat inquiry regarding the kite runner, for example, gives contradictory answers. In one response, ChatGPT deems Khaled Hosseini's novel to contain little to no explicit sexual content. Upon a separate follow-up, the LLM affirms the book does contain a description of a sexual assault. I found that as well in using Bard, where if you challenge it on something, you can often get it to change its mind. Sometimes that's refreshing after dealing with really stubborn humans, but anyway, it's interesting if you're trying to use it for this purpose, especially. Exman tells PopSci that even with ChatGPT's deficiencies, administrators believe that the tool remains the simplest way. I mean, it's simple for sure. You're fucking simple. Way to legally comply with new legislation. Governor Kim Reynolds signed off on the new bill on May 26, 2023, giving just 3 months to comply. I mean, for fuck's sake, how hard is it to just be like, hey, we have 30,000 books in our library. You want me to read every fucking one of them? That's not legally, that's not feasible. And it's not legally enforceable. So, like, screw you. We're not going through every goddamn book in the library. You know, that would be, I think, even simpler if simplicity is our standard. Quote, realistically, we tried to figure out how to demonstrate a good faith effort to comply with the law with minimal time and energy. When using ChatGPT, we used the specific language of the law. Does X book contain a description of a sex act? Being a former English teacher, I personally read and taught many books that are commonly challenged, so I was able to verify ChatGPT responses with my own knowledge of some of the texts. After compiling the list, we ran it by our teacher librarian, and there were no books on the final list of 19 that were surprising to her. For now, educators like Exman are likely to continue receiving new curriculum restrictions from politicians hoping to advance their agendas. It's like it has begun now. You see what I mean? By just, going along with this, you're just setting a precedent. Don't do it. Despite the known concerns, the rush to adhere to these guidelines could result in continued utilization of AI shortcuts like ChatGPT. And again, I think you find yourself at some point with just like the next Holocaust will be facilitated by AI. There's another article here I wanted to at least mention. I don't think we'll have time for it, but on the subject of library, Texas revamps Houston schools, closing libraries and angering parents. This was an article, let me see if I can get one of the pictures up, about they're like turning the library into like a detention center, and it's probably like going to be way at the end. Of course it is. We're on screen 4. Yep. It's probably on the last page. Nope. We got 2 left. Or maybe it was even just on the thumbnail. Oh, yeah. Oh, well. Anyway, about shutting down libraries. There's another story about turning one into sort of a detention hall, and the books were actually like locked up in cases. This is the environment we're in even before AI on its own becomes, sort of an autonomous threat to humanity. It will be used in every way that reactionaries can think of to automate racism into their systems, automate LGBTQ plus oppression into their systems, sexism, you name it, anything that they can get away with, they will build it in. And then it's like, oh, it's a computer, it's objective. No, AI is not objective. It definitely can be swayed in different directions, and that's something that we're seeing now. Not going to read that long thing on AI yet, but we'll continue with the chat for now. I thought the only way to avoid COVID was to vote blue no matter who. No, that's the way to be told to vax and relax. That's what the Democrats will tell you. And again, vaccines, an important plan B, but you cannot just not mask. You just can't. That's why it's going to keep spreading forever, and it's going to keep mutating, and it's going to keep killing and disabling people. That's what it's going to do. We have no reason to believe otherwise at this point. It's been going for 3.5 years. I say COVID numbers are climbing again in Austria, but they've only been climbing for 1 month, and they're still at kind of low levels. Yeah, but I mean, there are surges going on in other places. It's not unreasonable to be on alert for that. It doesn't mean it's going to happen in Austria, but there's a decent chance of that because there is this the EG5 strain is causing a lot of problems everywhere it spreads. So that could be something driving a new strain there as well. Do you think if they invade Niger, it will trigger a larger war in Africa? So back on the topic of the Niger coup and the junta currently ruling, basically there have been a lot of ultimatums delivered to the people that ousted the president, military cabal that ousted the president. And basically some of the surrounding countries, there have already been sanctions. I think Nigeria is, for example, really not on board with this. Nigeria supplies, I read, 70% of Niger's electricity. So, I mean, they could really, really hurt them if they wanted to. There's been talk that there will just be like a flat-out invasion to oust these people and bring the president back. Will it trigger a larger war in Africa? I do not know. I really don't have enough information to say. Why is there not a serious push in France to end the tax they have on former West African countries? Not being in France, I can't really comment more. I don't know what the specific situation. I mean, it's tempting to give the reply like everybody expects, which is just like, oh, well, people in France just benefit from colonialism and they just want to see it go on forever. That may not really be like the leading reason why. I don't know how much that's actually in French people's consciousness. I don't know how much that has actually even permeated people. I don't know because I'm not there. So I don't know. Maybe somebody more familiar with that can speak to more of the exact reasons. I don't want to make possibly incorrect assumptions. Because when we assume, it makes an ass out of you and me. Okay. Speaking of asses, Elon is an ass. Yeah, absolutely. Back on the Twitter thing. I mean, talk about making Twitter into a place just completely dominated by trolls that no one else is going to use. I mean, that's not good for numbers. That's not good for advertisers. They've already made it. You can't see Twitter without logging in. It's no longer going to be like cited directly in news stories. So you don't build a site into a $1 trillion brand by making it less socially relevant. You do it by making it safer to use, more integrated with major social functions. He's literally doing the exact opposite. So, his thing about the block is like, well, you can just mute people. Yeah, that doesn't, so if someone who is antagonistic to you quote tweets you and says, hey, go beat this person up, then their hundreds, maybe tens of thousands of followers are going to come in and harass you. Whereas if you block that person, they can't quote tweet you. And so what are you supposed to do? Just mute all those individual harassers? That would take forever. Plus you have to read what they wrote in order to see their name and evaluate whether you're going to mute them or not. So yeah, that doesn't work at all. Like, muting is not even remotely a substitute for blocking. In fact, I don't really mute people at all because, I've stopped using Twitter. I'll make the occasional announcement on there and then usually delete it afterwards. But I don't use Twitter anymore. But when I did, I wouldn't mute people because every time I did that, I don't know, I just regretted it in some way later. If you block somebody, I had an issue with this person and I just don't want to see their shit again. Whereas with the muting, it's like, I had an issue with this person, I probably don't want to see them again, but then I may wind up following them later, and it's just, anyway, blocking was just a lot easier. And it'd be funny, because I'd get messages from people like, hey, why did you block my friend? And it's like, I blocked 30 people today, I don't know. You know what I mean? Because they said something I didn't like, and it was to the point where I'm sick of having conflicts on this stupid website, and blocking for me was just easier than getting into an argument with them. You know what I mean? It's just whatever. But yeah, that is not going to work out well for Twitter. The other thing is they're like, oh, you can just make your account private. Well, isn't that nice? So then you have to just hide from all the people on the site. Anyway, all of this is suicidal for the website and just... Anyway, what can you say? Yes, Elon is an ass for sure. I refuse to use Instagram or anything Meta as well. Zuck can't have my data. I mean, S4A started out as a Facebook page. It's so right-wing, we got kicked off 3 times just being a socialist page. So I don't bother anymore. And I didn't really like the Facebook experience either. I never used it Like, personally, I made it for S4A, and I sucked. I didn't like it. Okay, so back on Kagarlitsky, this is the Russian leftist who was arrested at the end of last month for, quote, justifying terrorism online, is facing up to 7 years in prison. He was arrested for stating that the attack on the Crimean Bridge in October 2022 was, quote, understandable from a military perspective. Okay, so that is enough to get you jailed. Russia, not a big... yeah, I mean, the laws in Russia about the entire war and invasion, which, I mean, you're required, first of all, to call it a special military operation. It's illegal to refer to it in another way. Otherwise, it's considered undermining the credibility of the military. Got news for you, bro. Making people unable to talk about what the military is doing, that is actually undermining the credibility of the military. You know, that's a thing. I think that there's been a crisis of confidence overall. Before I was a communist per se, I was involved, you know, I mentioned 9/11 earlier, anti-war stuff, etc. I think especially going back to the Vietnam War, when a lot of people, especially in sort of dominant white culture within the U.S., started realizing that the government was lying to them systematically, daily, in just major ways, started leading to the real unraveling of the social fabric of U.S. society that started in the 60s and has just continued up to today. I think it is actually a driver of the emergence of neo-fascism and MAGA and the Tea Party, and people who think that we're going to take it back, we're going to go back to the Constitution and be honest. Like, they have no conception of class struggle and are reactionary and everything. The most I can say for these people is there is, to a certain extent, somewhere in those movements, germs of these people do know that they were lied to and they don't like it. You know, systematically lying to people is, you know, some psychologists have argued is enough to precipitate massive crises within a person's psyche, just the realization that you have been systematically lied to. That's been going on in the U.S., I mean, for a long time, but especially in the modern era, in the post-war era. There's been such a massive erosion of public confidence and trust. People don't know what to believe. Then they just start rejecting everything out of hand, which gets you into this hugely contrarian sort of LOLbert proto-fascist way where it's just, we're going to restore the ideals, and it's like, no, you're not. You're working within a system that's completely busted, and you have to learn about class struggle instead. They won't do that. But, or at least they haven't, and that's why they're still at the point that they're at. But, yeah, I mean, that isn't going to go well for Russia. People will see right through that. It's like, you're not allowed to call it a war. Okay? Says who? Oh, the people running the war. Okay. Well, that just, I mean, it just makes you a laughing stock. It doesn't make you look tough. It makes you look, like, incredibly weak. That, you know, anyway. I think you get the point. But there's a huge crisis going on in general of people knowing that they're lied to, not knowing where to turn. And, you know, again, communists need to educate people and how to evaluate evidence, to think critically, and to look at class struggle as the primary thing when evaluating political and historical questions, and all of the other things that are closely intertwined with class struggle. But anyway. On the topic of Twitter alternatives, I migrated to Tumblr basically as soon as the Musk purchase went through. That's part of how I got inspired to come to this channel. Lots of really good leftist discussion going on over there that tends to be sparked by one person being really wrong, but that's just the internet classic. Yeah, the so-called main character of the day. Every day on Twitter, there is a main character, and the object is to not be that person. That everyone is going, wow, you are incredibly wrong in ways I previously never could have imagined possible. But, yeah. I mean, and it is unfortunate. Actually, there was discourse on Blue Sky that was like, we're not going to quote dunk people, we're not going to quote tweet things just to deride them. because it tends to pollute the site. And I don't know, I think, yeah, there's something to be said for not repeating all the mistakes of Twitter over on Blue Sky. At the same time, it was through that kind of conflict in the 2010s that we got OK Boomer, and that we got the term Karen, and that we started kind of collectively as a culture pushing back on and rejecting some of the more reactionary stuff. I mean, there was like the Me Too thing, which was one aspect of a larger pushback against, like the boomer era sexism that was still persisting. And I think it was part of an overall pushing out of that like really outdated, late 20th century culture that people were just fed up with completely. So I get, I get people not wanting to have a totally conflict-ridden space where they can just sort of have fun posts, like maybe all the time. But I think it's unrealistic also, and I think that, we live in a conflict-ridden society. We live in a society based on a major class contradiction and other intertwined depressions within that. You're just not going to completely avoid that. And social media has actually proved itself to be a place that culturally can actually get some traction against that, at least in what people say publicly, which is a step forward in my opinion. I mean, good. I'm glad. Tumblr to me seemed more like of a 2000s, early 2010s thing. I didn't know people really still use it, but good. I'm glad something inspired you to come over here. And I think as the U.S. left generally tries to figure out its shit, it will become more and more Marxist again. And those of us who are interested in shining a light and guiding people along that way should absolutely do everything we can. So, interestingly, the party that controlled Niger was that of the president who was couped, and it was a Socdem party. Yeah, actually, that party, I forget the name of it, but it's part of the Socialist International currently that was in, that's still going, the Socialist International. So, yeah, I mean, it's a Socdem party that the president got ousted. Again, I can find little to nothing about the junta. So, I don't know. We will see. We will see. And like I said, I'll probably do a longer thing on that once I get done reading more. I've already read a lot of articles on it, but reading more, details are few and far between. Again, except for that background of the struggles against the fundamentalist terrorism, which wasn't an issue prior to the U.S.'s war on terror. Can't stress that enough. Senegal cracked down on the opposition to the government, banned them, and arrested a bunch of people. It's beyond parody that they're in ECOWAS. All right, yeah, I have not read anything about Senegal recently. So this Wagner group is like Black Ops or shock troops. They're a private military company, so they're mercenaries. And they are, they're like sanctioned by the, condoned by the Russian government. But, it's like Blackwater or something like that in the U.S. So it's a private military group, and but they operate with like state approval. And so, yeah, they're getting heavy in Africa, and the reason, like, what is the security concern? It's not even so much Europe directly. It's the terrorism, which again I hold as like basically CIA assets, but it's not. It wasn't like directly the French military, although they did kick the French military out in 2022, and they had been there from 2014 to 2022. But yeah, the underlying issue is the gangs of terrorists roving that area. So they were calling in the Wagner group to help them, like in lieu of France or the U.S. providing the military support, they wanted the Wagner group to do it. But again, it's like, when we say they wanted, it's like, I don't know, can we take that at face value, or, is somebody lobbying for Wagner group to come in? Michael Parenti did talk about new imperialism having to use mercenaries in order to use plausible deniability. That's what I kept thinking when reading about the Niger and West African situation generally, I feel like we're almost entering a stage beyond neocolonialism as we have known it into something new, and that's something maybe that I will try to articulate if that holds up in the course of my continuing to read and process this. But it seems almost to have like almost a new phase beyond. You had colonialism, which was direct rule by foreigners. You had neocolonialism, which was rule by people within the native population, but who served a foreign population. And I think that it's possible that this sort of neo-populist thing that is, pivoting to Russia, imperialism of a, quote, new type, it may represent, I don't know if it'll entirely be a third stage, but it does seem to have some new, like the whole idea that it's, allied with an imperialist country, but in the name of being anti-colonial, there may be something sort of substantially new there to keep an eye on. Wagner's stealing all the resources in Africa right now, locking off vital minerals. I mean, yeah, what else would you really expect? My view on the recent coups in Africa is a mixed bag. I think there are some more nationalist elites who see the country's rich in natural resources being some of the poorest, regular people being desperate and wanting some change, and possibly some opportunists looking to gain power. Okay, but here's what we have to do, all right? And I'm not saying that you haven't done reading. I'm not saying that you definitely are pulling this out of your ass. But we have to not pull things out of our ass, and we have to cite sources. If you're going to make a claim, you have to cite evidence for it. You have to. Otherwise, you get how this whole thing started for me. People's revolution in Niger. Cover it. Not even a link. Not even like a link to back up the idea that this is a people's revolution. Just an assertion. We cannot do that. We must demand a higher standard. Must. So are there some more nationalist elites who see the countries are rich in resources, yet they are poor? Like, for example, there's uranium mines. It sounds plausible. I don't know if that's actually a motivation at all. You know what I mean? Sounds plausible, but let's actually source some interviews or something. That's why I was asking, and I'm not saying this is like your fault, but like that's why I went out there and I was asking, hey, does anybody have any resources on the platform or program of the military junta in Niger? Guess what? No one had any. There was a patron who offered 5 links that were on the subject of the coup in Niger and did provide some of the background about terrorism. But I read 3 or 4 of them, and there's like 1 or 2 that I haven't. But none of them had the thing I asked for, which was and I appreciate the links, but my point is just, show me the people in charge talking about what they want to do and are going to do. Otherwise, this is speculation, and we just can't accept that alone as anything beyond its speculation. That's what I'm saying, is just people need higher standards for the evidence here. Like I said, let me find the guy's name. There were interviews with the leader of the M62 movement. Where is this? I'm bringing it up now. There was an interview last year with this person, and they were like, Thomas Sankara is my hero. Okay, are you actually a communist, or do you just like him? There's plenty of people that admire various figures, yet do not actually uphold their politics. So, let's see. This wasn't the article I was reading. Oh, here we go. This is from the Limited Times, newsrnd.com. Niger, what is the anti-French movement M62 at the origin of the call to demonstrate in Niamey? Thousands demonstrated in front of the France embassy in Niamey on Sunday, this is from July 30, in support of the military coup plotters who overthrew elected President Mohamed Bazoum and placed Abdourahmane Tiani in power. At the origin of this march, the anti-French civil movement M62, which launched this call to demonstrate despite the ban on gatherings, civil society organizations had joined forces against Operation Barkhane, carried out in the Sahel and Sahara by the French army against jihadist armed groups. That's what I was saying. The French were in there for like 8 years, trying to keep the jihadis under control, which previously wasn't an issue prior to the U.S.'s war on terror, then a convenient way for Western militaries to enter, anything under the guise of the war on terrorism. So for some in Niger, France is no longer welcome, but again, they're doing this pivot to Russia instead, which is like, this isn't just purely nationalist, and it's like, okay, are there pro-Russian, quote, populist, maybe Duginist actors in there agitating to just swap Russia for France? This Sunday, Nigerians were called to demonstrate in front of the Embassy of France, which has been degraded, in support of the military coup that overthrew elected President Mohamed Bazoum and placed Abdourahmane Tiani in power. At the origin of this march, the anti-French civil movement M62, which launched this call to demonstrate despite the ban on gatherings. Okay, this is translated from something, I think, because the English is not quite there, but the organization intends to warn ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, and France against any military intervention in Niger and, quote, demand the immediate departure of French troops and that of the ambassador of France. In the capital of Niger, there's a large demonstration organized by the M62 party in support of the CNSP, the power of the military which staged the coup. Numerous slogans against France and the entire West are heard at the demonstration. Many Russian flags have been spotted. And you see that in thing after thing, and I'm like, what? And so there's a movement opposed to Barkhane, created in August 2022, so about a year ago, and they were calling for mobilization against the presence of the French military in the region, again, there to fight the Islamic fundamentalists. If he claims autonomy vis-a-vis the French presence if it claims autonomy vis-a-vis the French presence in Niger, M62, quote, does not necessarily have a pro-Russian coloration, according to Gilles-Claude Mbang-Etondi, at least not officially, although the flags and placards in honor of Moscow flourished this Sunday among the crowd, which chanted in particular, Russia, Russia, Russia. This Sunday in Niamey, demonstrators tore down the plaque reading Embassy of France in Niger before trampling it on the tarmac and replacing it with Russian and Nigerien flags. Long live Putin, long live Russia, down with France. The article goes on. I will, again, try to synthesize this into a longer report at some point. Given all of the sort of pro-Russian pseudo-populism going on in the world right now, I am so suspicious of that, especially as we see actually, what is the fucking program here? You don't see it. So it's very vague, and where is this coming from? So anyway, continuing the comment, also many of the military leaders used to be American death squads to combat terrorism, but they also carried out massacres, especially in Cameroon. So I don't know if I will ever for concrete opinion. All right. So yeah, those are some of the dynamics there, but still details very hazy on the incoming coup and what they're actually about. We know the sort of pretext and the situation under which they're coming in. How will they actually be different from the outgoing president? That's the main question here. How will they actually be different? They're different people. They're claiming that they have some different program. What the fuck is it? I don't know. Can't find it anywhere. Except for Russia, not France. That's what I'm seeing. That's all I'm seeing, actually. So far. All right. Bernstein's claim that capitalism could go on forever, as discussed in Luxemburg's Reform or Revolution, reminds me of the concept of capitalist realism, which I always call capitalist fatalism. Yeah, I mean, it's like the idea that this is just the best we can do, and no matter what kind of bullshit capitalism throws at us, this is just like which it isn't. We can end capitalism and go on to a proletarian-led world. Producing for use, not profit, running the economy on a non-profit basis and without the capitalists. Campism. Yeah, also known as Dengist Three Worlds Theory. Would we include Ben Norton and Breakthrough News in that line of thinking? I critically listen to both. Yes, I mean, I see good stories that are not centered around campism or lesser evilism or Dengist Three Worlds revisionism. Breakthrough News is very close with PSL and the Party for Socialism and Liberation, which arguably is revisionist on is regarding China and sort of embraces more of that Three Worlds theory than we would like to see. Ben Norton, not a Marxist as far as I'm aware, tries to operate in this world, does do, I think, some decent stories that I see nothing I actually object with. But, these sort of rogue journalists that are not tied to any particular political movement, I think it's, they're a gun for hire, and you can only sort of trust them as long as you know where the paycheck is coming from. There are no actual standards to hold them to because they themselves don't even claim a particular ideology. So, yeah, I mean, I tend not to bother so much with the Ben Norton and Breakthrough News, but would we include them in the sort of campus Dengist Three Worlds Theory, lesser evilist, revisionist? Yeah, I would say so, although not everything that they do is horrible, but yeah, I definitely see that. 50% of Nigerien uranium goes to France via an agreement. The junta ended these agreements. Okay, so there you have a single plank of economic nationalism. So there's one thing. And yeah, France runs on nuclear power, so that is important. Based on BBC polling, 70+% of the Niger population supports the coup. Yeah, so actually I have from The Economist, let me put a thing on the screen, a couple of articles. No doubt that's true. We do have to ask what sort of informational basis people have. Necessarily, if they're out in very rural regions, do they know what's going on? In other words, is the support coming out of sheer desperation, or is it based on something more concrete? I don't know. So first, here's a map. This is the ECOWAS family of nations there up in West Africa. So you can see the position of Niger between Algeria, Mali, Burkina Faso, where there were also coups, Benin, Nigeria, and Chad, and then so on. Libya up there to the below where the legend is. That is the Sahel region, generally speaking. You can see up in the upper left corner. And so this economic community has been overall very opposed. The blue at least support sanctions against Niger, which is a majority of the countries by head count. And then the dark blue ones, which is a majority of those, would contribute to a possible military intervention against the coup. That includes Senegal, Ivory Coast, Benin, and Nigeria. The Togo, Ghana, Liberia, and Sierra Leone support the sanctions, but at least at the time of this, not military intervention. And then Mali and Burkina Faso are siding with Niger militarily. Again, coups in those areas as well. Guinea disagreeing with the sanctions, so in more of a neutral position, not endorsing the coup, but also not endorsing the sanctions. So that's a little bit of an overview. All right, so that's the map, just so you can sort of visualize what we're talking about here. But yeah, about the poll, let me get the poll up. So yeah, this was from The Economist, as Lenin called a mouthpiece for millionaires, but doesn't mean everything that they report is inaccurate. So the poll, obviously like heavily slanted title, Admiration for Autocrats. Which foreign actor do you trust the most? Russia, by far the most trusted foreign actor. One wonders what is the PR campaign going on in Niger that people trust Russia far and away above the other actors, because it's not even close. Number 2 is the United States. So, I mean, not exactly like great judgment there. Then Saudi Arabia, then China in a distant 4th place, then France, then the UN, then the UK. So, I mean, clearly Russia has got some great PR work going on there, as people overall have a very favorable impression of Russia. So, how would you like the situation resolved is the next question. And 44%, a plurality but not quite a majority, military leaders remain in power until new elections. And then a third of people, 34%, say military leaders remain in power for an extended period. I would take that to mean don't bother with elections. So then 12% say President Bazoum is reinstated immediately. 9% President Bazoum reinstated after a short period of time. And the polling, they note, is indicative due to a small sample that overrepresents educated urban men. So take it for what it is. This is basically the opinion of educated urban men, not necessarily everyone in the entire country. So a little bit of extra information there. Russian imperialism, similar to Chinese imperialism in Africa, is probably more welcomed than that of their ex-colonial masters. Not supportive of it, but it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, I mean, I agree. That seems to be the thing overall. I think that that too will wane with time, because the European colonialists and imperialists, as capitalism went on and developed, were wantonly brutal. And this was like really old school, horrific, slave trade, like all that kind of stuff. And everybody knows it by now. Everybody knows that's the history. And, don't trust those fucks. Russia and China have not historically had a presence there. So, as we know as Marxists, people doing capitalism are going to end up, capitalism is by its nature exploitation. But I think that Russia and China are able to play the kinder, gentler card for now. Eventually, class struggle will erupt. But yeah, if they're looking at it as a choice between the the countries with that legacy of the utterly brutal colonialism versus at least a fresh face that's promising, that hasn't punched them in the face yet, that is promising a fresh start, then yeah, it is completely understandable why you would at least turn to a fresh face rather than somebody that has a long history as an abuser on an international scale, for sure. But how long this will last before the class antagonisms flare up anyway, because capitalism is capitalism, that's the question. So yeah, I get it too. Fuck orangism and fuck bourgeoisie. Pigs. Colonialism took its baby steps in Ireland, and now everybody deals with the scum pig forces. There you go. The New People's Army should hopefully use, talking about the China-Philippines dispute, should use this inter-imperialist rivalry to play them off of each other. I was reading pay them off. Play them off of each other. Yeah, we'll see. I don't know if it's something big enough for them to be able to leverage, because right now it's sort of not a lot of direct conflict, and the U.S. is using a proxy of the Philippines rather than, the more sort of lots of, I don't know that the Philippines is going to get into like tons of direct conflict with a much larger China, but I don't know all the dimensions of that, so there may be strategic possibilities there for Philippine communists, but I don't know. Luckily, being raised as an Irish Republican socialist, I never had that anti-communist stance. Good for you, because, yeah, it's a lot to come out from as somebody who was, raised with kind of stock anti-communism. When Malthusian economics was used to justify the eradication of your people, it's hard to rectify capitalism. Yeah. There's an AnCap, anarcho-capitalist, or right libertarian clown running for president in Argentina. Javier Milei. All right. What kind of talking points is he using? Even with the so actually, let me read a comment there first. I had a comment pulled out of the YouTube for Didn't catch the stream, but I got a fun little anecdote. I just talked to a right libertarian I knew, and it was a roller coaster. 1 minute they would agree with me on a very valid criticism of the US government. The next moment they're spewing some Holocaust-denying nonsense. Yeah, I mean, this is what I was talking about before, about the crisis of confidence and, people knowing that they're systematically being lied to and all that kind of thing. It creates a situation where people, first of all, are hurt by it. They're psychologically hurt. It can create instability to the point of even just crisis. Just the realizing that you're being systematically lied to by anyone, particularly somebody you trust and somebody in authority, can have extensive psychological consequences for a person. And especially if you are between that stage and realizing that history, class struggle is the motive force of history, and you've become a socialist and things like that, you're in this very vulnerable no man's land. And a lot of those people, unfortunately, do cling very hard to a point that makes it impossible to work with them. But you see this with a lot. Okay, so unfortunately the streaming program I was using crashed, and suddenly I was just aware that I couldn't hear myself in the monitors, so I had to restart that. Let me see if I can pick up with what I was talking about. So yeah, just talking about libertarians and how obviously it's a crypto-fascist movement in practice because they reject class struggle and then wind up just trying to rally around the U.S. Constitution or something like that, which is foundationally capitalist in its orientation. But yeah, a lot of these people have realized, at least to some extent, that the government is lying to them and that it's in a systematic way. This can cause massive psychological damage. And I've noticed actually among people who I have known are libertarians, a lot of them have some kind of a trauma background. Like, whether it's like were abused in some personal capacity or whatever. And they've sort of adopted the stance of just, I don't trust anybody, nothing. It's very like trauma-based worldview. And unfortunately, people really do have to kind of come out of that before they're able to do more constructive work, and so on. But yeah, in the meantime, they do wind up being AnCap clowns and just sort of stooges for the rising fascist movement in the world. But I do think it goes back again to this crisis of confidence overall, of people realizing that they are lied to in so many ways.